Right now, in America, there are two types of people. One group is quietly positioning itself to come out of the next decade wealthier because of what's happening with artificial intelligence. The other group is about to get left behind by it, financially, professionally, or both. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most people don't know which group they're actually in. They assume they're fine because they don't work in tech. Or they assume they're already too late because they didn't buy the one stock everyone talks about 2 years ago. Both of those assumptions are wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you with history, not hype. Every major technological shift this country has lived through created the exact same split. A small group of early, correctly positioned people built lasting wealth. A much larger group watched from the sidelines, chased the wrong thing, or didn't realize they had a decision to make at all until it was already made for them. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly where the real opportunity in this AI boom is actually sitting, and it is almost certainly not where you think it is right now. You're also going to walk away with an honest read on whether your own job sits in the safe zone or the exposed zone. And I'm going to give you the risks just as directly as the opportunity, because the version of this story that only tells you the upside is the version that gets people hurt. Let's start where every real pattern starts. History. Because what's happening with AI right now has happened before, more than once, and the people who noticed the pattern last time built fortunes that are still standing today. Rewind to the 1800s. Railroads. Everybody wanted to own a railroad company. It was the exciting technology of the era, the thing changing how the entire country moved goods and people. Hundreds of individual railroad companies got built, funded, hyped. And most of them collapsed, merged into obscurity, or vanished into bankruptcy within a generation. Here's who actually kept the money. Not most of the railroad brands themselves. The companies that supplied the steel rails. The companies that owned the land the tracks had to cross. The financiers who funded the construction regardless of which specific railroad won or lost the race. The exciting story crashed. The boring layer underneath it quietly built some of the most durable fortunes in American history. Fast forward. The dot-com boom, 1995 to 2001. Same exact pattern, just faster. Hundreds of dot-com companies launched, hyped, went public, and then evaporated to zero when the bubble popped in 2001. Pets.com, Webvan. Names people forgot within a few years. But underneath every single one of those flashy consumer brands sat something nobody was excited about, the actual physical infrastructure of the internet. Networking equipment. Fiber optic cable. The data centers and telecom backbone that every single website, winner or loser, had to run on top of. That infrastructure layer wasn't the exciting story in 1999. It became some of the most durable long-term value to come out of the entire era. Now the smartphone boom, roughly 2007 through 2015. Everyone was chasing the next hot app, the next Instagram, the next Snapchat, betting on which one would win the popularity contest. Most of those bets were essentially coin flips. But every single smartphone, regardless of which app happened to be trending that year, needed the same underlying components. Chips. Sensors. Display technology. Battery supply chains. The companies supplying that unglamorous layer got paid no matter which app war was raging on top of it. Look at those three eras side by side and the pattern isn't subtle. The exciting, visible, hyped story attracts the crowd's money, and disappoints far more often than people expect. The boring, essential layer underneath it, the thing every competitor needs regardless of who wins, tends to produce the more durable, less volatile long-term returns. Keep that pattern in your head. Because we're about to point it directly at what's happening with AI right now, and the parallel is close enough that it should genuinely unsettle you. Here's what the average American investor is chasing right now when they say they're investing in AI. They're buying whichever AI-branded company is trending on social media that week. The chatbot everyone's talking about. The flashiest name in their news feed. And here's the uncomfortable truth about that approach. Many of those companies are being priced not on what they're earning today, but on enormous assumptions about what they might earn a decade from now. That makes them exciting. It also makes them fragile, because when a company's entire valuation depends on a future that has to unfold exactly as hoped, even a small stumble, a slightly slower growth quarter, a new competitor, can trigger an outsized drop. That's not a prediction that it will happen. It's a structural fact about how these valuations work. Now here's the boring layer sitting underneath all of it, the one almost nobody's talking about at the dinner table, because it doesn't have a flashy logo. Every single AI company, whichever one eventually wins the competition, needs the same physical foundation to even function. Massive data centers, full of specialized computing hardware. Enormous, growing amounts of electricity to power that hardware. Industrial-scale cooling systems, because that hardware generates a staggering amount of heat. The specialized equipment used to manufacture the chips themselves. And the physical real estate to house all of it. Here's why that layer is structurally different from betting on a single AI brand. It doesn't matter which chatbot wins. It doesn't matter which company's model turns out to be smartest. Every competitor in this race has to buy electricity, has to buy cooling capacity, has to build or lease data center space. The infrastructure layer gets paid regardless of who wins the popularity contest happening on top of it. That's the exact same structural advantage the steel suppliers had over individual railroads, and the fiber optic layer had over individual dot-coms. Let's make this concrete, because the scale of what's actually being built is almost hard to process in the abstract. Independent projections from Goldman Sachs research show United States data center power demand climbing from roughly 31 gigawatts in 2025, to 41 gigawatts in 2026, to 66 gigawatts by 2027, more than doubling in just 2 years. Separately, Gartner projects worldwide data center electricity demand rising 27% in a single year, in 2026 alone. And the 5 largest technology companies building this infrastructure are collectively committing hundreds of billions of dollars in capital spending on it this year. Spending on this scale, outside of government infrastructure projects, is almost without precedent in modern economic history. That is not marketing. That's what the physical build-out actually looks like right now, whether or not any single AI company ends up being the long-term winner of the software race sitting on top of it. Now, this affects more than your portfolio. It affects your paycheck, too. Let's talk honestly about where your own job sits in this picture. I want to be direct with you here, because most content on this topic swings to one extreme or the other, either total panic, or dismissive reassurance that nothing will change. Neither extreme is honest. Nobody can predict this perfectly. What we can do is look at the pattern of what tends to be more exposed, and what tends to be more protected. Higher exposure work tends to share a few traits. Highly repetitive. Rules-based. Involves processing information in a predictable, structured way. Think basic data entry, routine document processing, simple first-tier customer service scripts, straightforward content generation that doesn't require original judgment. That doesn't mean every job in these categories vanishes overnight. It means the routine, structured portions of that work are the parts most likely to be reshaped first. Lower exposure, more complementary work also shares traits. Skilled trades requiring physical presence and hands-on judgment, electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians. Complex, relationship-driven work where trust and human judgment are the actual product, not just information delivery. Specialized technical oversight, someone has to design, audit, and take responsibility for what these systems actually produce. And creative direction that requires genuine human taste and judgment, not just the mechanical generation of content. Here's the honest middle ground almost nobody states clearly: most jobs aren't purely one category or the other. They're a mix of routine tasks and judgment-based tasks. The realistic shift for a large share of the workforce isn't, your entire job disappears. It's the routine third of your job gets reshaped, and the judgment-based 2/3 becomes what you're actually paid for. That's a real disruption. It's also not the same thing as mass unemployment, and treating it as identical to that does nobody any favors. Take a moment, right now, and honestly place your own role somewhere on that spectrum. Not out of panic, out of information. Because the point of this segment isn't to scare you about your paycheck. It's to make sure the AI conversation in your head connects your career and your money into one picture, instead of treating them like two separate anxieties that never talk to each other. Now let's go deeper on where the actual investment opportunity in that boring infrastructure layer sits, and then, just as importantly, where the real risks in that thesis sit too. Let's break the infrastructure layer down into its actual components, because AI infrastructure is a vague phrase until you can see what it's actually made of. Power and energy. Data centers of this scale need enormous, reliable electricity supply, and that demand is arriving faster than the existing grid in many regions was built to handle. Companies involved in power generation, transmission, and grid infrastructure sit directly in the path of that demand curve, regardless of which AI company is the one ultimately drawing the power. Industrial real estate. Data centers are physical buildings, in specific locations, with specific power and cooling access. Real estate structures specializing in this category, the land, the buildings, the long-term leases, are a direct, physical bet on the build-out continuing, independent of any single tenant's software winning or losing. Semiconductor manufacturing equipment and materials. Notice the distinction here, not the companies designing the flashy chips everyone already recognizes by name, but the less visible suppliers of the specialized equipment and materials required to actually manufacture any advanced chip at all. Whoever wins the chip design race still has to buy manufacturing equipment from a much smaller, less hyped group of suppliers. Cooling and water technology. This is the layer almost nobody outside the industry thinks about. This hardware generates so much heat that cooling has become one of the single biggest physical constraints on how fast this build-out can even happen. Specialized cooling technology sits at a genuine bottleneck point. And for anyone who doesn't want to research individual companies in any of these categories, diversified approaches exist that capture this broader infrastructure theme across many companies at once, rather than betting on any single name. I want to be completely clear about something here. None of what I just described is a recommendation to buy any specific stock. I'm describing categories and sectors for your own further research, not handing you a ticker symbol. What matters conceptually is the structural difference. This layer gets paid on the build-out itself continuing, not on correctly guessing which individual AI brand ultimately dominates. Now, the part almost no creator covering this topic actually does. The honest risk. This thesis is not a sure thing, and treating it like one would make me exactly the kind of hype-driven voice this whole video has been warning you about. First risk, overbuilding. This has happened before, in this exact same infrastructure category. During the dot-com era, companies laid staggering amounts of fiber optic cable, betting on internet demand that took years longer to actually materialize than expected. Some of that capacity sat unused for the better part of a decade before demand finally caught up. The same risk exists here. If AI adoption or revenue growth slows even temporarily, the current pace of infrastructure spending could outrun near-term demand. Second risk, interest rates. This is enormously capital-intensive, debt-funded construction. Changes in interest rates directly affect the cost and pace of building this infrastructure, which affects the companies financing it. Third risk, regulation and local pushback. Communities living next to these facilities are already raising real concerns about electricity prices and water use, and regulators in multiple states are actively rewriting the rules around how these projects get approved and who pays for the grid upgrades they require. That regulatory picture is still being written, not settled. This is a different risk profile than chasing a single hyped AI stock. It is not a risk-free one. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling you something, not teaching you something. So, with the opportunity and the honest risk both on the table, what's the actual move? Let's make it concrete. 5 steps. Grounded, not hyped. Step 1. Go audit your own job, honestly, using the framework from earlier. Not to panic, to plan. If a meaningful share of what you do is routine and structured, start deliberately building the judgment-based, relationship-based, oversight-based skills in your field now, while you have the runway to do it on your own timeline instead of someone else's. Step 2. If you're already holding investments tied to AI, take an honest look at how concentrated that exposure actually is. A portfolio sitting entirely in one or two hyped AI names carries a fundamentally different risk than a portfolio with broader exposure across the theme. Concentration isn't inherently wrong, but it should be a deliberate choice, not an accident of chasing headlines. Step 3. If the infrastructure thesis makes sense to you, research it yourself, using public, free resources, company earnings calls, SEC filings, industry reports, rather than taking any single video's word for it, including this one. This is genuinely more research-intensive than clicking buy on a trending stock, and that extra effort is part of what makes it a less crowded trade. Step 4. Treat this entire thesis as a satellite, not your foundation. A solid, broad, diversified long-term portfolio should remain the core of your financial plan regardless of what happens with AI. This is a theme to layer on top of that foundation, not a replacement for it. Step 5. Revisit this every 6 to 12 months. This technology, and the market's read on it, is moving faster than almost anything we've seen in decades. A thesis built today deserves a fresh look in 6 months, not blind faith for the next 10 years. None of these steps require you to correctly predict which specific AI company wins. That's the entire point. The layer we've been discussing gets paid whether it's one company or 5 splitting the eventual winnings, which is exactly why it carries a fundamentally different risk profile than trying to pick the single winning brand. Here's what I want you to actually walk away with. This was never about predicting the future perfectly. Nobody can do that, not me, not the largest hedge funds on Wall Street, not the companies building this infrastructure themselves. What this video was built to do is show you a pattern that has now repeated across at least 3 separate technological revolutions in American history: railroads, the internet, smartphones, and point out that the exact same structural split is forming again, right now, in real time, in front of us. The crowd chases the exciting, visible story. That story often disappoints. The boring, essential layer underneath it, the thing every competitor needs regardless of who ultimately wins, has historically been where the more durable value actually sat. You now know that pattern. You know roughly where your own job sits on the exposure spectrum. And you know that the honest version of this opportunity comes with real, documented risk, not just upside. What you do with that isn't something I can decide for you. But you're not standing in the same spot as everyone else who's still only chasing the headline anymore. That's the actual difference this video was built to make.